On a storm-soaked evening in the heart of the city, 17-year-old Lila Montgomery, born into wealth and arrogance, crosses paths with a homeless old man outside her father's luxury hotel. Urged on by her friends, she mocks and humiliates him without mercy. But behind the man's silence lies a story intertwined with her own bloodline. And as he watches her walk away, something shifts. Fate, patient and deliberate, has begun to turn. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drenching the neon glow of the city and painting the sidewalks in mirrored streaks of gold and crimson. Outside the opulent glass entrance of the Montgomery Grand, the hotel that bore her family's name, a frail old man huddled beneath a broken umbrella, his trembling hands cupped for spare change. His clothes clung to his thin frame, and his eyes, though tired, held a quiet dignity that the storm could not wash away. Lila Montgomery stepped out of the waiting limousine, the flash of its headlights slicing through the rain. At 17, she was everything money could shape, flawless, entitled, untouchable. A designer coat clung to her shoulders, her laughter sharp and effortless as she linked arms with her two closest friends. "Ugh, look at him," sneered Tessa, gesturing toward the man as they passed. "Why doesn't he just get a job?" Lila smirked. "Maybe this is his job," she said, fishing a few coins from her purse. "Hey, old man," she called out, tossing the coins so they clattered at his feet, scattering into the gutter. "There's your paycheck for the day." Her friends erupted into laughter, and a small crowd nearby turned their heads. The old man slowly bent to pick up the coins, rain dripping from the brim of his battered hat. He said nothing. He didn't even look at her. The silence irritated Lila more than any insult could have. "What? No thank you?" she taunted, stepping closer. "Or is gratitude too expensive for you too?" For a brief second his eyes met hers, deep, unflinching, and strangely familiar. Something in that gaze unsettled her, but she quickly brushed it off with a scoff. "Come on," she said, turning back to her friends. "We're wasting time on trash." They disappeared into the golden-lit lobby, leaving the man alone beneath the rain's steady drum. He exhaled slowly, his hands curling around something inside his coat, an old, folded envelope worn soft from decades of being opened and closed. "She doesn't know," he whispered to himself, almost like a prayer swallowed by the storm. "But she will." From beneath the hotel's awning, he watched her silhouette fade into the elevator's glow, his breath visible in the cold night air. The rain kept falling, washing over the city like a cleansing truth waiting to be revealed. Somewhere deep inside, the old man knew that their paths were not finished crossing, and Lila, laughing carelessly with the weight of a name she did not yet understand, had no idea that the man she humiliated held the key to a secret that could tear her entire world apart. The rain had stopped, but the city still glistened with its memory. Lila walked alone down the same street where she and her friends had laughed the night before. The echoes of her cruelty replayed in her mind, unwelcome and sharp. "Why can't I stop thinking about him?" she wondered. The old man's eyes, steady, knowing, had followed her into her dreams. She told herself she didn't care. People like him were everywhere, weren't they? Broken, hopeless, forgotten. And yet, as she approached the hotel entrance again, her steps slowed. He was there, in the same spot, sitting upright on the cold stone, his back against the wall, rain-stained hat resting in his lap. Only this time he wasn't begging. He was waiting. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air. Gone was the arrogance that had danced on her tongue the night before. "Words failed her now, Miss Montgomery," he said softly, his voice rough like pages of an old book. "I have something for you." Before she could reply, he extended a trembling hand holding a faded envelope, creased, yellowed, edges softened by decades. Lila stared at it. "What is this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. "Truth," Samuel replied, "and a piece of your family's soul." Curiosity overpowered caution. She tore the envelope open, unfolding a letter written in elegant, careful handwriting. As her eyes scanned the words, the world around her seemed to fall silent. It told of a man named Samuel Carter, a visionary architect who, decades ago, had drawn the plans for the city's first affordable housing complexes. A man who had poured his life into a dream meant to give dignity to the poor. But Samuel was black, and in that era, that was all it took to erase a man's worth. The letter recounted betrayal. It spoke of Montgomery & Co., led by her grandfather, who had stolen Samuel's designs, claimed them as his own, and built an empire from them. The same empire that paid for Lila's schools, her clothes, her life. And when Samuel protested, he was branded a fraud, blacklisted, ruined. The dreamer became invisible. The architect became a beggar. The words blurred as tears welled in Lila's eyes. This can't be true, she whispered. Samuel watched her, not with anger, but with the weary patience of a man who had carried injustice too long. It is, he said quietly, and you needed to know. Lila clutched the letter, her chest tight with shame and disbelief. Everything she'd been taught about her family, their honor, their legacy, now felt like a lie carved into stone. As Samuel rose and turned to walk away, Lila stood frozen in the cold morning air, the weight of the envelope heavier than any crown. The days that followed were a storm within Lila's chest. The letter never left her hands. Its creased edges became familiar beneath her trembling fingers. Every time she closed her eyes, Samuel's words echoed. You needed to know. One night, long after the mansion had gone silent, Lila crept into her father's private study. The heavy oak door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing walls lined with leather-bound books and locked cabinets that smelled of dust and secrecy. She hesitated, heart pounding, then moved to the filing drawers. Hours passed, and then she found them. Rolled-up blueprints marked Montgomery Housing Project, 1972. Signed not by Montgomery, but by Samuel Carter. Beneath them lay legal documents, transfers of property, manipulated contracts, and settlements paid to silence dissent. Her hands shook as she traced Samuel's name scratched out in red ink on one document, replaced neatly by her grandfather's signature. Another file revealed a smear campaign labeling Samuel as unstable and unreliable, justifying his erasure. It was all true, every word. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of it crushed her chest. The empire she had once admired, the name she bore with pride, was built on theft, racism, and lies. By dawn, Lila stood in the great hall of the mansion, documents clutched in her hands. Her father descended the staircase in his robe, irritation flashing across his face. What are you doing with those? He demanded. You knew, she whispered, her voice trembling. All of this, Samuel's work, his designs, his life, grandfather stole it. You kept it hidden, her father sighed, almost bored. Lila, that man was naive. He didn't understand how business works. Business? Her voice cracked. You ruined his life. We built an empire, he said coldly. He was just a man with a dream. And dreams don't pay bills, her breath caught. You don't even feel guilty? Guilt? He chuckled bitterly. This is how the world works, Lila. Winners write history. Losers become footnotes. The words struck harder than any slap. The father she once idolized now looked like a stranger. She fled the room, the documents pressed against her chest, her heart breaking under the truth. Outside, the city skyline glowed. The towers and hotels her family had built standing tall on Samuel's stolen dreams. Samuel had vanished from the streets. He'd refused her calls, her visits. It wasn't revenge he sought now. It was dignity. And that made her guilt even heavier. Alone in her room, Lila stared at the empire her name represented and wondered, who am I, if this is what it was built on? The storm that once raged inside Lila had quieted into resolve. The sleepless nights, the gnawing guilt, the heavy silence between her and Samuel. All of it had led to this moment. 3 months had passed since she uncovered the truth. In that time, she had watched her father tighten his grip on the company, circling the family name like a fortress. But Lila had changed. She no longer saw that name as a shield. It was a stain that could only be cleansed with light. And so, one quiet morning, she made her choice. The evidence, Samuel's original designs, the contracts, the forged documents, was sent to every major news outlet in the city. Headlines exploded. Montgomery Empire built on stolen legacy. Architect erased by racism fights back after 50 years. Her father's fury was volcanic. Do you have any idea what you've done? He roared, slamming his fist on the marble counter. Yes, Lila replied, her voice steady. I told the truth. You've destroyed everything our family built. She met his glare with calm defiance. We destroyed Samuel's life first. That evening, she resigned from the company, her signature scrawled across the same letterhead her grandfather once used to erase Samuel's name. This time, it was being used to free it. Days later, she stood outside a small community center where Samuel now volunteered. He looked older than she remembered, but there was still a quiet strength in his eyes. Why are you here, Lila? He asked, not unkindly. Not to ask forgiveness, she said. I don't deserve it. I'm here to build what should have been built with you, not over you. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly Samuel nodded. "If we're going to build it," he said, "it has to be ours. Equal." "Equal," she promised. Months later, a new sign rose over a plot of land once owned by Montgomery and Cubser. It read, "The Carter Housing Initiative." Beneath it, workers poured foundations for affordable homes, the very dream Samuel had drafted half a century ago. On opening day, Samuel stood before a crowd, holding the original blueprints in trembling hands. His voice quivered as he read aloud the words he'd written as a young man. Homes for the forgotten, dignity for the overlooked, hope for the next generation. Tears burned behind Lila's eyes as she watched him. The man she had once mocked now stood tall, his legacy restored. And the girl who had once laughed at his pain now bowed her head in reverence.